Ever since I was a small boy, I've been fascinated by stories of the Wild West.
What now? Fire!
Stories of cowboys, Indians, wagon trains, and the gold rush. But for me, those stories are inseparable from the landscapes in which they took place. The mountains, the deserts, and the Great Plains. In this series, I want to explore those stories, looking at how they were shaped by the very landscape in which they took place. Throughout the first half of the 19th century, pioneers had been crossing the vast North American continent by wagon and on foot. But by 1869, something was completed that would change everything. America's transcontinental railway. The train annihilated concepts of distance and time. Once, the continent had taken months to cross, but with the America's east and west coasts connected by rail, those 3,000 miles of mountain, prairie and desert could be crossed in under a week.
This is what would change the West forever, the railroads. With the railroads established and a lot of propaganda encouraging people to come west, there was a flood of humanity into the prairies. 1.6 million people headed west.
Many of them were headed for the Great Plains, a vast ocean of prairie in the middle of the continent. The early pioneers had seen the plains as a barren landscape, a place to be crossed en route to the fertile farming lands further west. But now people were set on making a life here, fired with the incentive of the Homestead Act. The act was passed by the United States government in 1861, offering 160 acres of free land to pretty much anyone willing to farm it, and thousands of people flooded onto the Great Plains with just that intention. Do you hear that sound? That is the sound of money. And of course, this was the homesteaders' vision. Crops as far as the eye could see. When they saw all this grassland, they thought, we can turn that into farmland. There was just one problem. How do you build a house in a land with no trees? Homesteaders weren't wealthy people. They couldn't afford to import lumber, let alone bricks, to build with. But of course, necessity is the mother of invention, and some bright spark said, well, why don't we use the grassland itself? If we cut turf, we could use that like bricks to build buildings, and that's exactly what they did. It's estimated that there were over 1 million sod houses built all across the prairie, one of which is just here. This remarkable building is probably one of the rarest in North America. This is a sod house. It was built right at the beginning of the 1880s. And you can see very clearly the bricks made of turf, and there are some roots. They found that the roots of the prairie grass made for very strong turf bricks, and they'd lay them so the roots were facing upwards, and they would grow into each other a little bit. These bricks got the nickname of Nebraska marble. That's how strong they were. The interior of the building is really in a remarkable state of preservation. This building was inhabited until 1952. Since then, it's been derelict, but you can see how well it was taken care of in the fact that it's preserved. One of the secrets was that a tin roof was put on in later years, but we have a graphic picture of what life was like in this house. A house comprised of 2 rooms. 8 children and 3 grandchildren were born in this building. The walls were a great home for rodents and birds, and the children would sometimes find that their socks had been stolen by rodents and taken off into the walls into their nests. Before this roof was put on, There was a roof of wood covered with heavy black paper and sods on top of that. And when it rained, sometimes it would leak, and the father would have to rush out and put soil over where the leaks were. But there were certain advantages. The sod was a wonderful insulator. So in the extreme heat of summer, the interior of the house was always cool. And in winter, it was remarkably warm. God, really atmospheric. There's still life in here now, look at that. Small communities like this deserted hamlet of Montrose in Nebraska began to emerge in the rural interior of the Great Plains. I've come here to meet up with homestead historian Tammy Littrell to find out more about the people who took up the challenge of farming this landscape. I've got some pictures here that I put in this scrapbook that were taken by Solomon Butcher, who was this amazing photographer who photographed many of these homesteads. And I mean, they're quite remarkable, aren't they? You get a sense of pride in these families. What sort of people came out here?
Well, anyone that was 21 years old could sign up as long as they were the head of a household. So it could be a single woman or a widowed woman. It could be a newly freed slave. They were people that were fairly adventurous, but not always. Sometimes they were like a young farmer in a family of 8 boys, and he knew that he was not going to get the family farm back east. It was too small. And so he had the opportunity to have land for himself, you know, to start his own place. It would be immigrants in eastern cities that are just jam-packed and they're wanting to own their own land, or it would be European immigrants who were always tenant farmers or could not afford to buy the land to start their own farms.
Then there's this astonishing photograph. Now, I'm assuming that they must have built a frame house by now because it's a very high angle.
Well, actually, what this picture is about is she was so horrified to have her family know that she lived in a soddy, a dirt house, that she had Solomon and her husband carry that pump organ out into the barnyard, and Butcher climbed the windmill and got that picture off of the top of the windmill.
So there's the elevated position.
So she has her possession. She's very proud of the organ, and then in the background you see there's pigs and cattle and horses and everything that he has, and different implements, farm implements, to show, you know, what he's accumulated.
Really, this country was built on the backs of ordinary people, people who came out with a dream in their hearts, and when they found no trees to build with, they literally lifted the turf and made their homes from it.
Lots of ordinary people, lots of different cultures, so it was a fabric of different people that came here.
It's the fabric of America.
Mm-hmm. And hard work. And luck.
The new frontier was there for the taking. But having made it here, the settlers still faced a huge challenge: how to farm the virgin prairie. Some of them had arrived from Europe with farming experience, but the soil and climate, even the grass on the Great Plains, were different from anything they'd ever seen before. This is short grass prairie. You find that in the most arid areas, but there are places on the plains where there's slightly more rainfall, and there you get the tall grass species, and they are recorded as having grown all the way up to chest height if you're on horseback. It's astonishing. But when you look at any grass, really you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. You need to look underground to see what's really going on. Take a look at this. This is a species called switchgrass. That is a life-size photograph showing just how extensive the root system is. In 1 square metre on the prairie, there can be 5 miles of roots. The roots were so dense and so tightly packed that when farmers attacked them with iron ploughs, the ploughs broke. It was only when steel ploughs came into the prairies that this land could be turned into farmland. For many settlers, the challenges proved too great. Up to an estimated 60% of homesteaders admitted defeat and returned home. But for those who remained, the American dream became a reality, and their descendants are still thriving here today. I've travelled to Custer County in Nebraska to meet Kevin Cooksley, who still lives on the land where his great-grandfather's sod house once stood. So now we're coming up to where the sod house was, aren't we?
Yep, the depression is there. You can go right to where the well was.
The ground actually feels a little harder here, because that would have been tamped down, wouldn't it?
Alex Purney, my great-grandfather, immigrated here in 1876 from Edinburgh, Scotland.
Do you have any photographs of it?
The one that was made famous by Solomon Butcher, this would have been Alex Purney, and you can see the sod house.
When they were living in that sod house, what was life like?
There were no trees, so when you arrived here, firewood would have been in short supply. So you used the dried buffalo chips, cow pies for fuel. Once you started growing crops, corn primarily, you could burn the corn cobs.
They must have been incredibly isolated.
Things that come to mind, you know, you worry about the hostiles, you worry about the storms, you worry about the poisonous snakes, you worry about injury, because where do you go for a doctor, where do you go for medicine?
And of course, childbirth as well.
And childbirth, yeah. How many, you go to the old cemeteries and look how many headstones have children that died when they were 1 month old, 2 months old, or women that died in childbirth.
What made him stop here?
Well, that's a good question, and I've asked myself that. The best answer I've been able to come up with, they found a place that reminded them of home. I imagine that when Alex got here and he looked around and he got up on this hill and he's got the creek down below, he's got 360 degrees visibility all the way around. He's high enough he doesn't have to worry about floods. And I think he looked around at the hills and he thought, this looks like home too.
And the frame house, which is still standing, how far would he have had to bring that lumber?
He writes in his journal of going to Grand Island, Nebraska to get the lumber to build the house. And Grand Island is 90 miles away.
And this frame house is very grand, isn't it?
Very, very grand. I mean, complete with a balcony and a walkout door so he can step outside and view his kingdom, if you will. He had to feel like a man who had arrived.
But these early homesteaders who began to settle here still faced a major problem. With an average of less than 38 centimetres of rain falling on the plains each year, finding enough water to expand agriculture was tough. But the ever-resourceful farmers found a solution to this too. Extracting water from hand-dug wells was hard work, so they turned to the natural resource they had in plenty, the relentless plains wind. Windmills like this are a common feature in this landscape. It's wonderful technology. It's very simple and very effective and can be long-lasting. This pump has been functioning since 1893. That, of course, made life so much easier for the homesteaders. What they didn't realise, though, is that they were tapping into an incredible natural resource, the Ogallala Aquifer. It's porous rock underground here that, like a sponge, holds an enormous amount of water. In fact, it spreads under the prairie for an area of 8 states. The combination of this huge hidden water supply and the new windmill technology enabled the homesteaders to alter the frontier beyond recognition. Both crop and cattle farming flourished. Incredibly, within 1 generation, the vast prairies had turned almost entirely to farmland. The new farms were supported by America's railroad boom, as farming equipment, steel plows, and water pumps were shipped to homesteads across the Great Plains. By 1890, 6 huge transcontinental lines straddled the continent, with hundreds of branch lines connecting isolated communities. It opened up new opportunities for trade right across the Great Plains. And at the railheads where the tracks ended, a new kind of town grew up, the cow town. This is the greatest cow town of them all, Dodge City. It began life as Fort Dodge, but it was transformed by the railroad's arrival in 1872. This auction is a lasting legacy of a beef bonanza triggered in the mid-1800s. Cattle would be herded north from southern ranches to cow towns like Dodge City. Then the beef could be shipped by rail back to the new nation's growing cities in the east.
Sold them $1.39, put them on 85 on 8. Here, family, thank you.
To find out more about those early cattle drives, I've come to Moore Ranch, a working ranch southwest of Dodge City. These are your classic longhorn cattle. They're beautiful, aren't they? They originally brought here by the Spanish and farmed by the Mexicans, but as the United States established its borders and the Mexicans retreated, large herds of these were left in the prairies. That, coupled with the fact that during the Civil War, a lot of the farms were left untended, created an opportunity for these animals to go feral and really breed up. By the time the farmers returned, at the end of the Civil War in 1865, they found upwards of 5 million longhorn cattle loose on the plains. That would usher in a new era, the era of the cattle drive, and bring with it that iconic figure of the West, the cowboy. The ranch is owned by the Moore family, third-generation ranchers who come from a long tradition of cowboys. Today, Joe has promised me a taste of life in the saddle. We'll be driving his cattle to pasture, a sort of beginner's version of the great cattle drives of the Old West. So, Joe, this is a quarter horse.
Right.
What's the story behind the horse?
The quarter horses evolved in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Basically, what they bred them for was an animal that had a very quick speed for short distance, hence the quarter horse for running quickly for a quarter of a mile. They were bred to catch a calf or catch an animal quickly.
It's a combination of endurance and short distance
Short
speed.
distance, quick speed.
Yeah.
When the stampede starts, you're on your own.
The 1870s and 80s were the heyday of the cattle drive as cowboys drove great herds of cattle north across the unfenced plains to railheads in Kansas or Nebraska, where they would be transported to market. These cattle drives would mean spending over 3 months in the saddle, covering distances of up to 2,000 miles. Heat, dust, quicksand, stampedes, snakes, drought, lightning, and dust storms were everyday problems. It's no surprise cattle driving was a young man's sport. The average age of a cowboy was 22. They worked for $1 a day. The cowboy was really just a hired man on a horse, but he captured the imagination of dime novels and Hollywood. Even today, much of that myth lives on. Joining me at the campfire is Jim Hoy, an expert on cowboy folk life. Can you just give me a description of what a cattle drive was?
Well, usually, typical size was between 2,000 and 3,000 cattle. You'd have 10 cowboys, 10 drovers could handle that number of cattle easily. And then you'd have a chuck wagon, carry the food, also any medical supplies, You'd gather these together in Texas, and they'd start them off. Most of them would start in the spring. As the grass began to get green down there, they'd follow the grass north, in a sense. First day, they'd drive maybe 20 miles. Two reasons. One, get those longhorns far away from home. They got a strong homing instinct. You don't want them going back where they were. Also, get them kind of used to the rhythm of the trail. If you got them at the very first so they'd handle well and get the rhythm of the trail, you could walk 1,000 miles with those cattle. They'd weigh more when they got to Kansas and when they left Texas. But if they started stampeding the first day or two, they might run all the way and they'd lose weight. After you go those first couple of days, you'd slow down. 15 miles was a big day after that. You let the cattle graze grass, and then you'd put them in camp, and you're usually in camp 10 hours a night. You get into the camp, you bed the cattle down, leave 2 cowboys out there to kind of watch them, ride around them. And when it got dark, you'd sing or hum so the cattle would know you were there, and the belief was that it kept them quieted down. It was like a lullaby.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that sometimes the cowboys would fall asleep in the saddle.
They did. And if the cattle are stampeding, running, causing trouble, you might go 2, 3, 4 days without ever getting off your horse.
One of the things that fascinates me about the West is the way things come and go. It really seems like little bursts of gunpowder going off left, right and centre. There's a flash of something and then it dies out. So the horse arrives, the Indian go after the buffalo with the horse, then the buffalo's gone. And that's the same true of the cowboy, isn't it?
Yeah, in a sense. 2 major things contributed to that: technology and barbed wire. The railroad, of course, the cowboy was created by technology of the railroads, but that didn't end the open range. Barbed wire did. 1878, it's invented, patented. 1883, they began to fence up the XIT ranch in Texas. That open range era is over by more or less 1890. A wide open life with the wide open spaces. When they fenced it, it changed the nature of ranching, changed the nature of cowboying very quickly. You think of the cowboy, it defines America as its folk hero, but that open range cowboy, a bare generation, 25 years. Yeah. Come along, boys, and listen to my tale. I'll tell you the troubles of the old Chisholm Trail. Come a tie-ya, yippee, yippee, yay, yippee, yay. Come tie-ya, yippee, yippee, yay. Started up the trail October 23rd. Started up the trail with the 2 you heard. Come a tie-ya, yippee, yippee, yay, yippee, yay. Come tie-ya, yippee, yippee, yay. On a $10 horse, on a $40 saddle, I'm gonna punch in longhorn cattle. Come a tie-ya.
The Wild West hit the prairies. It was like a stampede beyond any human control. It burned across this landscape, changing everything. By the end of the 1800s, cowboys were no longer making cattle drives because the landscape had been fenced. The wild grasses were replaced now by crops. But in a strange way, the landscape shaped the nation. And I think that here, in the very heart of America, in the adversity and the tenacity that was shown, the very nature of the American personality was defined.